my great honor to introduce the next speaker. She is a dear friend of mine from 27 years. And Christa is the current CEO of Aludo, former CEO at OpenTable, current board member at Affirm Payments, Kimberly Clark. She is an incredible human being, an incredible leader, and somebody that I aspire to be like when I grow up one day. I always have her come to the keynotes. A few years ago, I hosted her at a conference where she said some words and she's going to share them with you later today. But it really struck me that when you get to the top, it's not only that you can affect change, but that you must affect change. I was so inspired to hear her words. I thought that she should come and share them with all of you. So Christa's going to have an amazing story, her journey for you, her figuring out how to step into her power and finding her purpose. So with that, my dear friend Christa, thank you.
Awesome. So, who in the audience is like perfectly self-actualized and knows exactly why they're here on Earth and has gotten it all figured out? Okay, that table, maybe they're microdosing or something over there. I'm not sure what's happening. But I think, as I'm going to pull this up a little bit, adjust my speaker here. So, people ask me all the time, did you dream of becoming a CEO? Was that like your life's goal? Were you like a mini Mark Cuban who was like selling things from the time you were 12 and had your entrepreneurial, I was using paddle for my lemonade stand very, very early on. See, I got that even there for you now. The answer was no. The answer was, I was a do a good job, get good grades in school. In my case, I was an athlete. It was put your nose down, work hard, and honestly, shut up and just get it done. That was really the story of my life. There was no vision of ever becoming a CEO. I didn't have a belief system in it. But as I've gotten through this a little bit more, I realized actually the CEO part is the symptom of a much deeper yearning for what I am meant to be in this life. And actually one of the things that Martha Beck talks about is that your life's journey is only ever clear in reverse. You don't actually know what you're going to do. You can't plan anything. You can't plan anything out. And actually one of the things she says is, pay attention to your yearning. Because it's the yearning that brings you forward to your soul's desire. Just let that sit for a minute, for a second. Like, what are you yearning for in your life right now? What is calling to you? What is that voice that kind of keeps tapping you on your shoulder and encouraging you to go do? That's the thing that you need to pay attention to, and that's some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So I was at a conference, maybe not unlike this one, where a very prominent venture capitalist stood on stage and said, oh my gosh, I read this book about Genghis Khan, and I can't tell you what an incredible statement on feminism this book was. And I went over here like, what? I never understood Genghis Khan to be some sort of feminist icon. So I'm like, oh shoot, I better go get this book and read this thing about Genghis Khan. So I read this whole book and I'm like, what the hell was this guy talking about? Like, there are a few moments where the men would go off to war and Genghis Khan's wife and his mother would kind of manage business operations at home. But like, maybe it was like 8% of the book. Okay? So I'm like, what on earth is this guy like over-rotating on this like feminist icon of Genghis Khan? It turns out, actually, this perception wasn't wrong. Women actually make up less than 0.5%, or less than 1% of all stories in recorded history. Why does this matter? Well, I realized that I had kind of erased my own story in the midst of the broader story, trying to fit into go back actually to pre-recorded history, to when there was a world where actually like women, the matriarch, we could own land, we could have titles, we could preserve things. And then what happened? What happened was greed, expansion, growth, and we kind of evolved into the military might. And so muscle power kind of prevailed as the dominant factor driving society. It really wasn't until about 100 years ago when the Industrial Revolution began that brain power began to supersede muscle power as a driver in dominance in society. So it doesn't surprise anyone that perhaps women's stories and ultimately my story will start to come into focus as a result. And I think it's, this is one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. And I never say it just the way that it's written, because as I think about my own life, I actually have to add editorial emphasis on it, which is the arc of the moral universe is like the pain, the challenges, the being hit over the head, just the torture oftentimes. It is long. It's really, really long. And it bends toward justice. And I think the key is how do we start to see when the bends toward justice are beginning, both in the world and in our own life. And I think it's really important that you start to think about how your own life fits into this, because it's me, we, world. If you're not sorting your own stuff out, you're never going to be able to sort your company's stuff out, and then you're never going to be able to make an impact in the broader world, in this civilization, if you don't actually have your stuff straight. Why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish? What is it that you uniquely are in position to do? And so I ask, what is your story? We all have a version of a story, by the way. Like you go into an interview and they're like, tell me about how you got here. And it's like, do you want the 1-minute version, the 5-minute version, the 20-minute version? I got them all. And they're pretty fixed. And I was at a recent event recently where they said, okay, we're going to put you all in dyads, and we say, I'll give you 1 minute, and you tell your story. So it's like, oh, I grew up outside of Pennsylvania, I was, this kid, I went to Carnegie Mellon, I went and did this, and da-da-da-da. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to change everybody, and you're going to tell your story again, but it's got to be different. And you go through these 6 and you realize, oh, this is just me trying to make sense of this crazy, crazy story in our world. So for me, that story starts, I was the 6th of 7 kids. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My dad worked at U.S. Steel, and my story was all about grit. It was like, you better go pay for your college education. We don't know how you're going to do that, but you got to go figure it out. Go get a scholarship, be smart, do whatever, but go figure it out. And so what I knew for sure was that I just didn't want to be at the whim of anybody else. So I thought, well, shoot, I didn't grow up with a whole lot of money. I'm going to go work on Wall Street. It was a place where I was like, well, you know what? I can go and just get a regular job, make at least $1 million a year. What could go wrong with that? What I didn't maybe realize at the time was it was, in fact, at least for me, a bit of a Faustian bargain. Sell your soul, go make some money. And so because of maybe how I grew up, because of the story that was laid out in front of me, it was like, all right, eat or be eaten. Kill or be killed. That's the game on the field? Well, shoot, I'm going to go play. And that's where I first learned, okay, when I started working on Wall Street, it was 1994, and strippers had just gotten outlawed on the trading floor. And I had been working, if anybody's a Michael Lewis fan, Liar's Poker had just come out, and actually a lot of the guys in Liar's Poker were on the bond desk at Merrill Lynch where I was working. And it was fun to throw things at the interns. And I was like, all right, I'll look around. Back to be quiet, be small, put your nose down, figure it out, play the games on the field. And I did. So I swore inappropriately. I still swear too much. I laughed at, I created misogynist jokes because it was, this is the path. So I don't consider myself necessarily very fearless. I made myself a byproduct of the environment that I was in. And so that's kind of continued on. I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit strange. I'm Gen X. I know Han and I've known each other for 27 years, but we're only like 32 years old, so I know it seems strange. But so, kind of this idea of make yourself small. I never negotiated for a job or the salary of that job. And so put your head down, do the work, do the work, do the work, do the work. That all worked until one day I'd been working on the West Coast at a firm called Thomas Weitzel. We were taking growth companies public. And I was a rising star. I was like 28 years old. And I knew how much money I was bringing in to the company. And so I was basically the number 2 driver of revenue, and I knew kind of approximately how much that was worth. And then I got my bonus that year. And I think I was 32 out of 34 in terms of what I ended up getting paid. And I think maybe they did me a favor, because had it been like I got paid number 10 and I was number 2, I might not have said anything. But it was so ridiculous and so egregious, I literally got out of my skin. And I went to my boss at the time, and I was like, so, this is what you do. You just ask the woman. And I just freaked out. I'm not really proud, actually, of how I behaved. I would not recommend that to anybody here. But here's what happened. That afternoon, I got at least 7 figures more that afternoon. I did also get a visit from the general counsel to make sure I was going to sue. But here's the thing. For the very first time in my life, I spoke up, I spoke my truth, and I was hurt. And I was like, this is interesting. And I think what we need to all sit there and start to pay attention to, this isn't just a negotiating compensation story. This is a shut up, don't make yourself heard, don't be known, do what the world wants of you, and don't ask anything from the world. So life lesson number 1 for each of you as you start to think about your story is, what are your truths? What is deep inside in your value system? This wasn't about getting paid more money. This wasn't actually about money at all. This was about being seen and validated and recognized. And I think we start to need to give voice to it. I think one of the things that I've begun to learn, and I would start to do this, and I started, after this point, I was like, okay, I'm going to keep trying this out. And I started getting pretty good at it, but I still noticed I would do things like I would add a lot of humor into my truth. And while that's important, like, Professor Acker from Stanford has written a whole book about humor, and I still use humor. I consider myself super funny, by the way. I used to be like, well, if somebody doesn't laugh at my jokes when I interview them, they're definitely not getting hired. I realized that I was using humor as a mechanism to soften my message. And that I wasn't actually super comfortable in sitting in the power of the entirety of truth in it. And so getting used to, and what I would encourage all of you to do is start getting used to sitting in the power and perhaps the discomfort of being in truth. And getting grounded in what is true. Because here's what I know for sure. Leaders who are deeply connected to their self-truth are the ones people want to get behind. Dr. Becky talks about the 3 pilots. The first pilot, it's like they're going to hit turbulence. The first pilot's like, I don't know what turbulence we're talking about. I don't know that there's any turbulence here. Am I second thought was like, shut up, sit down, the plane's bouncing all over the place. You're gonna go, or it's, hey, we're gonna go through some turbulence over the next 30 minutes. I've driven through this. I know what this is like. We can handle it. I'm clear. I think it's getting grounded, knowing what is true for you, and being able to sit in the discomfort of that is super important. So here's, love the proverb. You know what I hate is when people are like, tell me about a time you failed and what you learned from it. And I was like, dude, I don't fail. Like, I make it happen. And so if I think about my life, it was like I had always figured out how to juke and jive and turn myself back to my own malleability. I figured out how to turn myself into whatever I needed to be in order to find the success condition. And that worked until it didn't. And so I got to a company, and it was about 6 weeks into the job, and I was like, oh crap. I don't know if I can make this. And I just come off of like, I sold my startup to the Walt Disney Company, I got promoted 3 times in 2 years. I kind of prided myself as, I can make it work. I can do anything. I can mold myself. I can be whoever you want me to be, and I will find a success condition, and I will get myself promoted, and I will get myself more money, no matter what. And then I get to this company, and I'm like, oh dear, I don't think this is the right place for me. I knew that 6 weeks in. 6 months in, I was literally crying in the bathroom, freaking out, calling my sister. And I was like, is the failure here that I couldn't figure out how to make this specific situation work? Or was the failure preventing the fall? And in my case, I had tied my identity to success at all costs, always make it work, always make it happen, that I was so afraid of preventing the fall that I was stuck. And in my mind, the failure was not failing. Everybody, if you're human and if you're doing anything that's worth anything at all, you are going to fail, period. But what I did is I held on for dear life and prevented the fall. I stayed stuck. Where are you stuck in your life? What fall are you preventing? Because I know I was so deathly afraid because my whole identity was caught up in this whole success condition. Here's what I know for sure. Let yourself fall. By the way, it hurts. You're on your ass. You're on the ground. You're like, oh my God, that hurt. But now you can get back up. And I think I was so afraid. I remember I was at this job. It was terrible. I get to January, and it's like, I can't do this anymore. So I was like, you know what? I made a New Year's resolution to myself. I'm just going to get out there and start interviewing. And I was so afraid because I was like, oh my God. People are going to be like, why couldn't she make it work? What was wrong? What was wrong? And I'll tell you this, I went into probably the most popular venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and they did not care at all. I couldn't believe it. I have a friend who's got a Southern mom, and she always used to say, who's looking at you? We create this whole vision, this whole shame, or whatever's in our head that prevents us from actually just getting back up. Here's what was for sure. This VC, what they saw was a capable, aggressive, ambitious person who wanted to go do work. And they were thrilled. They literally did not give 2 shits, I'll say, that I didn't have it figured out. It was a story, and it was just in my own head. So use failure as a rebranding moment for yourself. In my case, it was, I can make it work. I can rebrand that to, I can make it work, ... with good people. I can make it work if you're honest and have integrity. Think about what is holding you back with regard to elements of your story. Comment to this, or I don't know what you want, but it's this idea that you can change the rules of the game is that you must. So, fast forward, I had been the CEO of OpenTable, and we were in the midst, and it was my first CEO job. This is over 10 years ago now. And I had gotten into a situation where I had essentially been in a conference, not like this one, and a guy stood up and said, hey, the reason women aren't getting ahead in Silicon Valley is because they're actually just not supportive of each other. And I literally was like, bullshit! But I didn't actually have all the work, so I kind of pushed forward and said, okay, here's the thing that we need to do. Here's how, like, once you get into a position of leadership, how do you change the rules of the game and how do you pull people forward? So, life lesson number 3. Don't just change your life, help others in this and part of this group. So this is me in that moment telling BS that we're going to support each other. But I also had to look back and say, well, what would we not do? How do I put myself forward in this story? So I want you to start thinking about what personal power is. I think about it as, when you're at the grocery store and your 4-year-old like throws something on the ground, throws a tantrum, and you're like, oh my gosh. They don't actually have positional power, but in that moment, they are clear in what they want and what they value, and they're going to exhibit it. Now think about positional power. Are we allowed to show you on pictures here? But here's an example of like, I'm in charge, I'm going to dictate, screw you all, it doesn't matter if you believe in me or not, I'm going to dictate how this goes. And then think about when it is. So I think about the story of Nelson Mandela 30 plus years ago. And when he was writing in the jails, he was exhibiting personal power. And then he gets out, and then he's in a position as the president of South Africa, a positional power. And now you take personal power, what you believe in, what your values are, what you know to be true, what your voice is, what your truth is. And you take it with leadership. I'm in charge of a company. I'm in charge of a country. I'm in charge of a region. Personal power plus positional power in this instance is the end of a part of that. Now we're talking. I can't tell you how many CEOs I talk to who they climb first mountain and they're like, but what's it all for? Where am I going to extend and empower and have an impact on this world? So I said at the beginning, we were talking about the early stage of muscle power and brain power, and I guess in this age of AI, there's this idea that like brain power is actually not going to matter going forward. It's really heart power. And everybody connecting to their heart, connecting to empathy. AI may or may not express the empathy, but does it actually feel the empathy? But the leaders that are going to get ahead, the leaders that are going to be needed and necessary as we move forward, are the ones who are connected to. And so I'll kind of end where maybe I began, which is this idea that being a CEO is actually the symptom. And so what is represented here is an exercise that I did where you break your life into 7-year increments. And it's kind of a way of like rethinking, rewriting, reimagining what the driver of your story is. And I don't need to go into what all this, I drew all this by the way, all this iconography means. You can see here, these are my like Wall Street years where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go just make some money. But what I really was getting at is, why am I on this earth? Why am I running a company right now? What impact am I going to have? What is my brand and style of leadership and inspiration that's different? And in my case, I think I do a pretty good job of holding the space between shadow and light, saying the thing that nobody's saying, remarking on the invisible thing. And ultimately, it's about bringing liberation to life. How do I create we think about, this is a conversation about these days as you guys are looking to create personal growth, personal transformation, personal inspiration, is